Okay, so I'm here to make this video to explain the eighth nakshatra in the zodiac out of the 27 nakshatras known as Pushya Nakshatra. This is a nakshatra that falls in between 3.20 degrees of Cancer and 16.14 degrees of Cancer. And the symbol for this nakshatra is a cow, or a cow's udder. And the sexual animal that's associated with this is a goat. And what else can I say about this nakshatra? This is a Saturn ruled nakshatra. And yeah, this is a Saturn ruled nakshatra. Just had to look at my notes and double check. And the deity that rules this nakshatra is Brihaspati. Brihaspati is, known as Guru, and is personified by the planet Jupiter. He was blessed to have a special place in the cosmos, and he is basically, like the personification of Jupiter. So all the things that I'll tell you about this nakshatra sort of naturally applies to the natural karakas and the natural significations of what Jupiter is all about. So first, let's start off about some mythology, some mythological lore associated with Brihaspati, who is the deity of this nakshatra. Apparently, the story of his birth goes something like this. His parents, they wanted a kid. And they wanted a son or whatever. So they worshipped and prayed to the fire god Agni. And Agni gave them a boon, which means a wish. He granted them a wish, granted their wish for them to have a kid. So, the mother of this couple, the wife ended up getting pregnant and gave birth to Brihaspati. And one of the things that was involved with this wish was not to just only have a kid, but for the kid to be very smart, to be very intelligent. And apparently the Vedic, Hindu Trinity, Lord Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva was present when Brihaspati was born, and they gave him a special place amongst the stars and made him Jupiter. They gave him the planet Jupiter, associated him with the planet Jupiter. And yes, so that is the origin of Brihaspati's birth. So what is the significance of this story that I just told you? Well, if you know anything about the Karga, or the significations, which what Karga means, significator, if you know what the things that Jupiter is a natural significator of, then you'll understand how, this goes along with his birth. Jupiter is a natural significator of one, a teacher, and a teacher, a guru, and children. And I just told you that Brihaspati was born out of a wish granted from a fire god, a fire deity known as Agni. So you see how Jupiter gets that one association with being related to children. His father was a sage, and Brihaspati ends up growing up to be a teacher his own self. So you see that relation of children and of being a teacher and education. Another thing with Brihaspati is that he was appointed to be like this guru, this counselor, this advisor to the devas, which is basically divine, godly, sort of quote-unquote benevolent divine beings. He's the gods' advisors. So he advises the gods and the deities and stuff. So from that perspective, you understand and see why Jupiter naturally gets the association of politics. Jupiter is known to be a natural karaka of the fifth house, and the fifth house, which is originally ruled by Sun, is also a house known to be associated with political things. And with Jupiter, aka Brihaspati, known to be this advisor to deities, we see that political nature, because if you're an advisor to gods who have control over the affairs of the world, much like the government would of your country, then that's sort of like, you know, a bit political. So that's where you see some of the political significations come alongside with Jupiter. And you might wonder, why is the symbolism for Pushya Nakshatra a cow's udder, or a cow? You might think that this is a very nurturing nakshatra because it's associated with Cancer and stuff. And Cancer is ruled by Moon. And Moon represents the mother. And the fourth house represents home life and all that stuff. All of those are great things to connect the dots, but the main reason that the symbolism for this side of Cancer is the cow's udder is because what Brahaspati does is that he nurtures the world, he nurtures people with his knowledge, with his intellect, with his wisdom. That is how he is nurturing people. That is how he is feeding and providing people. He's nurturing people with his wisdom. It's not necessarily, you know, nurturing like holding and cradling a baby type of nurturing, but nurturing people by feeding them intelligence. And now that leads us to the second and major, you know, mythological story associated with Brahaspati that is basically everybody knows if they got a little bit of Vedic knowledge and a little bit of Nakshatra knowledge up under their belt. So it goes like this. Brahaspati was married to his wife named Tara. And Tara, yeah, she was being neglected because Jupiter, Brahaspati, the guru, was so caught up in being a teacher, teaching people and advising people, doing rituals, that he neglected his wife. And she ended up stepping out and having an affair with the moon spirit Chandra, aka known as Soma. And she ended up getting pregnant by the moon spirit, by Chandra. And Brahaspati was furious about this. And don't quote me on this. I don't know if they had a war or a fight or whatever, but eventually the dispute was resolved because deities and gods came to them like, hey man, that's your fault. You neglected your spouse. You didn't pay attention to her. You was too busy being mystical and stuff that you left her hanging. So you're just going to have to eat that. You're going to have to accept it and man up. So he takes his wife back, and he found out she was pregnant. And the kid that was given birth, that came from Tara, from, you know, the moon spirit Chandra, was known as Mercury. She gave birth to the planet Mercury, who goes by the name of Buddha, Budha. If you know what the name Buddha and what Buddhism and all about, basically Buddha just means the enlightened one. So Mercury is known as Buddha or Buddha, known as the enlightened one. And Mercury is the child of Jupiter's wife and is the child of the moon. And Jupiter, Brahaspati, is Mercury's stepfather. And this is why, you know, Mercury is like associated with intelligence. You know, Jupiter and Mercury are intelligence. But Jupiter is considered to be more so like true, real, divine intelligence. But Mercury is very smart. And you see this because Moon is his biological father. And Moon is associated with the mind and emotions. And then Mercury's stepfather is Jupiter. Jupiter is this sage, this guru who came from this wish from a fire god to be very intelligent. He is this mystical sage, this mystical guru who is so intelligent and magnificent that he was appointed to be a counselor and advisor to deities and gods, and he was given his own planet. So, you know, getting that wisdom and knowledge from his stepfather just makes Mercury real intelligent. You know, he got the best of both worlds, being associated with the mind and the moon, his biological father Chandra, and having the wisdom of the stepfather Jupiter. And that's the end of the mythological stories. So what do you learn from this mythological story? We see that Pushya natives, you know, especially if it's associated with the 7th Lord, or if you have a planet in Pushya in the 7th house, or if you have your Venus in Pushya, then you would see these themes. You would see that your spouse could potentially get so wrapped up in their profession, get so wrapped up in their spirituality, their religion and whatnot, that they could end up neglecting their partner. And they might end up stepping out on you and cheating in or having, you know, an affair. But this isn't the case for everybody who has planets associated with their 7th house and love in Pushya. You know, you gotta look at aspects. These effects can be watered down and dwindled, or these aspects can be lit ablaze if they have a bunch of malefics aspecting or associated with Pushya. But, you know, this is a Saturn-ruled nakshatra, and Saturn is a slow-moving planet. It's a slow-moving nakshatra. I mean, it's a slow-moving planet and stuff. So, you know, usually the malefic effects, the negative sort of, you know, effects associated with Pushya can improve, you know, by your Saturn return, or as you get to your 30s. You know, you'll start embodying some of the greater and more positive and noble characteristics and qualities of the Pushya nakshatra. But early on, you might see some of the negative effects in regards to relationships and love. And I lied. There is another mythological story that I can tell you about Brihaspati in regards to Pushya nakshatra. So, it's funny that Saturn is the nakshatra lord of this nakshatra, and it falls in between, and it falls in Cancer, which is where Jupiter is exalted. But I'm gonna just get to the story and just spit it out. So Saturn's alternate name is known as Shani, and Shani at one point, he wanted to come to Jupiter to be taught, you know, wisdom and knowledge and all this mystical stuff, right? But Jupiter didn't want to have nothing to do with Saturn. He didn't want to have nothing to do with Shani, because he stated that, you know, Shani was like an illegitimate child of Surya, which is the sun deity. And if you looked at my first 2 nakshatra videos with Ashwini and Bharani, you'll know about that. But to quickly recap, Surya is born from, Shani is born from his father, the sun god Surya, and from a clone of Sun's first wife, because Sun's first wife ended up leaving the Sun because he was either too hot or because he had, you know, a bad temper. So she made a clone of herself, and the Sun didn't realize for a while that he was ended up dating and being married to a clone of his wife, and he made kids with this clone of his wife. And Saturn, aka Shani, is an offspring of this clone of his wife. And this is why Brihaspati, Jupiter, said that I don't want to deal with you because you're essentially an illegitimate child, and I just don't want to deal with you. But after much pleading, he ends up eventually taking Saturn under his belt and teaching him things. But he eventually, you know, he doesn't give Saturn his blessings. He doesn't give Shani his blessings. And it is very important, apparently, that a student receives the blessings from their guru, from their teacher. But Jupiter wouldn't give it to him. So Saturn ends up leaving, and he ends up finding another teacher, another guru, and that would be Shukracharya, known as Venus. And Saturn, you know, is told by Venus, Shukracharya, that, you know, Brihaspati was teaching you the wrong things. And he was teaching you the wrong things. He was misinforming you. And, yeah, we see from this perspective, this is why, you know, Saturn is like exalted in the sign of Libra, which is this planet which is a sign ruled by Venus. And to, you know, refresh our mind, Venus, Shukracharya, is a deity, is a guru who is an advisor to the Asuras. which are a class of beings who are sort of known as demons. And it is because that Jupiter didn't give Saturn the right information, the right knowledge, that there's a little bit of animosity mythologically in between Jupiter and Saturn, which would sort of explain why it is sort of considered that Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn, which is the sign of Saturn. So what can we learn from that little mythological story? Jupiter in general is, a selfish planet. Jupiter is in its characteristics and qualities is selfish. Jupiter doesn't give its knowledge just to any and everyone. Jupiter will make you work and put you through obstacles to sort of acquire the wisdom and knowledge. Jupiter is very picky, but Venus isn't so picky, ain't really as picky as Jupiter, which is why Venus is sort of exalted in Pisces, which is ironic because that's a sign of Jupiter. This is why, Venus in its highest state, exalted in Pisces, it has no boundaries. It's very loving, very giving of its knowledge and information. So a Jupiter is sort of naturally, very selfish, which sort of explain why Jupiter gains Digbala in the first house, directional strength in the first house, which represents yourself. But what else can I tell you about Pushya Nakshatra? Pushya Nakshatra is a very soft and nurturing nakshatra, intellectually for the most part. It's not a violent and aggressive nakshatra. This is not a nakshatra for when the moon is transiting that you go and, wish to cause harm on people. Pushya Nakshatra is a nakshatra that is just about favorable for doing any and everything except for marriage, starting relationships, and violence. Acts of aggression and war. Pushya Nakshatra is just about great for starting and doing any and everything except for violence and, starting a relationship or starting marriage, because we could see the potential of an extramarital affair and a kid outside the marriage could happen. But, this is a very great nakshatra for teaching, for doing rituals and magic and mystical occult things. This is a good nakshatra for all of those things. And that's essentially all I have to say that I can really think of when it comes to Pushya Nakshatra. I hope this gave you great clarity and insight in regards to what happens when you have planets in Pushya Nakshatra in your birth chart. Thank you for watching.